Okay, so in this tutorial today we're going to start looking at the Processing.js software. So the processing software basically is our starting point to code, and it codes very visually, so it's a good way to learn an object-oriented coding language and seeing it quite clearly happen in front of you in sort of a visual basis. So we start off with our sketch screen. At the top here you have run to run your program, and you also have stop to stop running your program. And at the very top of the screen we have a bunch of menu options as well that we can use to do different functions. So the first thing we're going to start with is learning some of the basic draw functions of processing by doing some sort of 2D geometric shapes and arranging them on a canvas that we've sort of specified. We'll learn today how to change the particular colours and also how to change the size and colour of the outline or the stroke of your images. So the very first thing we can do is just to press run, and what we'll see happen is that our default sketch appears. Now at the moment there is nothing in our program, so it comes up with the default canvas size with a default colour and no pictures drawn on it. What we would like to do is increase the size of this application, and we're also going to add a background colour to it. So processing has some pretty simple functions that we can use to do these automated features for us. So the first function that we're going to type in here is size. Every function is followed by a double bracket and a semicolon. What happens then down the bottom, you'll see that it's saying the function size expects parameters like size, integer, integer. So basically what it's saying is inside these two brackets, it's expecting two integers or two whole numbers, and that's essentially going to be the width and the height of our canvas or our application. So we're going to start today by doing a square canvas that is 600 pixels by 600 pixels. If we press run now, we can see that we get a much larger canvas to work with. So that's the very first function that we can do in processing. The second function that we're going to have a look at is changing the background colour of our canvas. So again, there's a simple function that will automate that for us. If we type background, again with the double brackets and the semicolon, you can see here this time that it's asking for a particular parameter or a whole number integer. Now processing uses RGB values to present colours. So we can give one number anywhere from 0 to 255, and that's going to give us black, a bunch of greys, or white. If we put in three values, one for red, one for green, and one for blue, we'll be able to get all of the different colours of the rainbow. So this is when up in Tools we can use a handy little feature built into processing, which is the colour selector. Our colour selector allows us to use this tool to select any colour that we want by using the slider, or any hue I should say that we want by using the slider, and we can then drag this little cube around, and that'll give us all of the different saturations and brightnesses of that colour. So these lighter desaturated red, there's fully saturated red, we then have bright red all the way through to sort of dark reds. So I'm going to choose a kind of a teal colour here. And we can see that it's giving us a value for red, a value for green, and a value for blue. So in my brackets up here, I'm just going to type those three values separated by a comma. If I press run now, you'll see I get a canvas with my exact shade of sort of aqua or teal on it. That's essentially how we can customize our application setup. Now we're going to look at drawing some simple shapes. So the first thing that we can do is to start by putting a point on our canvas. And again, I can use the function point, followed by two brackets and a semicolon. So this time it's asking me for a float and a float in my parameters. So in these brackets it's expecting two numbers, but these numbers could be decimals or they could be whole numbers, but it's allowing me to put a decimal value into those brackets. And what it's asking for is an X value and a Y value. So if you can imagine that your canvas is a large grid, that is 600 points wide and 600 points high. We can then decide where on that 600 we want the point to go and where on this 600 we want the point to go. Imagine that your 0 is at the top. So our first number is how far out we want it to go, and our second number is how far down we want it to go. So if I was to put here that I want it to be 50 by 100 and press play, I should see a point appear on my canvas at 50 across and 100 down. Now it's a very tiny little point at this stage, so what we want to do is actually make that a little bit bigger by putting in a command that says stroke weight. And this means that it's going to increase the weight of our pencil or our stroke to whatever value we put inside these brackets. So 1 is its default value, which it is at the moment. So that's 1 pixel. So if I, for example, put in here 10 pixels, I'm going to get a much thicker point. I could obviously go crazy and make that 100 pixels, and I'm going to get a much bigger dot. Okay, but essentially we don't need to make it this big. We have other tools that can draw ellipses for us. So at this stage, I just want to make it 10 pixels so I can see it clearly on my canvas. Now it's important to recognize here the order of operations. So order of operations in programming means that a program is going to execute things in the order that they are written in here. So for example, if I put this stroke weight text underneath my point, it's going to draw the point first and then change the width of my pencil. So I'm going to see no change. I'm going to have a 1 pixel dot on my canvas, which is not what we're after. So what we need to do is change any of those kinds of parameters before we draw our shape. Okay, so the second thing that we're going to have a bit of a play with, is once we've fixed up our order of operations, the second thing we're going to have a play with is drawing a basic ellipse. So again, we can use a function for this, which is ellipse, with our double bracket, spell ellipse right, a double bracket and semicolon. Again, it's expecting 4 numbers, and essentially what it is asking for is the position on the canvas on the X and Y first. Then it's going to ask for the width and the height of our ellipse. Now the ellipse is going to come out from the middle of that point. So if I say 50, 100, again, it's going to happen right in the middle of that point, and the circle will be around it. I don't want it to be on top of that point at the moment though, so I'm going to put it at 200, 200. So it should come across to about here and down to about here and draw a circle. Now the width of our circle I want to be 50, and the height of my circle I'm also going to make 50. Now if we run that, we can see that I get a circle. Now what's happening is that it's got this thick outline on it because our stroke weight is still at 10 pixels. So what we can do is in here is change the stroke weight to something a little more manageable, like 4. And we can see there that we don't have such a large outline on our shape. I would also like to change the color of my circle. So before I draw my ellipse, I've changed my stroke weight to 4. I'm also going to change my fill to a color that I've selected down here. So let's go with this light pink color. Closing my bracket and adding my semicolon. And we'll see now that it's filled in the color of my ellipse with that pink color that I've selected. I can also change the color of my stroke by coming in here and saying stroke. And I might go for a darker pink colour. 250, 10, 198. So that's how I can draw some sort of basic shapes and change the particular colours. Now there are a lot of shapes that we can do, such as a rectangle. So a rectangle again is going to want 4 float numbers, or 4 decimal numbers or whole numbers inside the brackets. So we can start by putting in the X value. So this time I want it to be 300 on my X-axis, 300 on my Y-axis, and I'm going to make the width and height 50 also, so it'll be around the same size as my ellipse. And we can see that it's still got those colour or the fill properties and stroke properties from my last little block of code there. So with order of operations, I'm going to come in the top here and I'm going to say no stroke. So I want to remove the outline from that rectangle, like this. I could also change the fill colour to maybe blue, 10, 92, 250. And now we have a blue rectangle. Okay, so I've made all of my sizes at this point even, but they don't have to be. So I could increase the height of my rectangle to 100, and so I get a larger rectangle shape. And the same with my ellipse. I could change this value to be 100, so it's no longer a circle, but it's more of an oval shape. We can also draw lines using processing. So at the moment I have no stroke selected, so if I try and draw a line, it's probably not going to do it. So what we need to do is come up with our stroke weight again. And we're going to make it 5. I'm going to change the colour of my stroke to 255. So I'm just going to go with a solid white. And then I'm going to say line, and I'm going to put in 4 float values. So the first 2 values are where you want the line to start on the X and Y, and the second 2 values are where you want the line to finish on the X and Y. So we can start here and say, okay, I want the line to go from maybe here. So I'm going to start 50, 300. So it should start in the middle here in line with that point. And I want it to come down here, so we can say maybe, say 350 on the x-axis, which should line it up with our rectangle because it started at 300 and is 50 pixels across. So it should line up with that. And the end point y-axis we want to be somewhere down here, so we'll say 550. And there we go. So we have a line that lines up with our first point because it's starting at the same point on the x-axis, and it's finishing in line with our rectangle because it's ending at the same point on the x-axis. And the other 2 values I've just sort of selected at random, but if you had a design in mind, then obviously it could be a lot more specific. Okay, so now that we've done our stroke, we're going to try putting in a triangle. So at this point, I want to change my colour. I'm going to leave my stroke weight at 5, but I'm going to change my colour. So I can come here and change my fill to some sort of yellow. Like this one here. 240, 245, 109. And underneath here, we're going to say triangle. Now, triangles become a little bit more complex because it needs the X and Y coordinates for all 3 points of the triangle. So if you two were imagine that I was going to do a triangle here, my first point would start here, and then it would go up to the top point, and then down to the last point, and the last line will automate. So the first coordinates I need are the coordinates of where I want my starting point to be. I might say I want it to start at 450 on the y-axis, and then I want my middle point to be 420 and 10 on the y-axis. And my last point will be at 440 and 50. Let's see what that does. And there's my triangle. So you can see here that it's come 400 along the x-axis, it's come down 50, then we've put 20 points further along, so it's 420 on the x-axis and 10, so really close to the top. We've come another 20 points across, making it 440 on the x-axis, and we've lined the y-axis up with our first point. So if, for example, I was to change this to 100, it would then jump into line with this one, and I would get a random shaped sort of triangle. I can bring this one to 100, and that will square it out again. If I was to increase this last value from 440 to 480, it's obviously going to stretch out this side. I change this one now to 440. I'll go back to being sort of a perfect triangle, but larger. So these are your basic sort of geometric shapes that we can use to draw with in processing. We can obviously make things quite a lot bigger than what I've made them here, and they can overlap. So if I was to come into my rectangle, and instead of being 50 by 100, which is quite small, I'm going to make it 200 by 250. You can see that that's made it quite big. It's important to note, though, that due to order of operations, it will layer things accordingly. So at the moment, my stroke or my line is on top of my rectangle, because that's the way the order of operations shows it. It drew the rectangle and then it drew the line over the top. If I was to move this stroke to before my rectangle in the code and run it, my line is now behind my rectangle. So the best thing to do is to have a bit of a play with these different shapes, get used to changing the color, changing the stroke weight, changing the stroke color. And also, one of the best ways to, I guess, be able to measure out your drawing is to draw it first on some sort of graphing paper. That will then give you these coordinates. So you'll be able to see if you want a line to go from here to here and you draw it on graph paper, it's going to give you the exact XY coordinates of where you want to place your pieces to go. And it can be much easier then to come into the code and type it all out when you already know what values you want to have in each of these coordinate parameters. All right, have fun.